And then inside here, we have two rooms basically. This is the
$400. That is what one homeless man paid for a 30-ton steel boxcar that no thief can break into, no storm can shake, and no city sweep can load into a dump truck. It is 5 in the morning in a freight yard outside Kansas City, 19 degrees. And while a man downtown sleeps sitting upright in a bank doorway with his boots tucked under his knees, this man is asleep in a real bed behind a steel door bolted from the inside. But everyone who lives in a retired train car tells you the same strange thing. The steel that protects them is also the thing that tries to kill them every summer and every winter. Here is how both halves of that sentence are true. First, you need to understand how a home like this can cost less than a month of rent, because the answer is one of the strangest accidents in American industry. A freight railroad cycles through tens of thousands of cars, and when a boxcar gets too old or too bent to certify, it gets shoved onto a dead siding and forgotten. A 50-foot steel car contains real money and scrap metal, but cutting it apart and trucking it out of a remote siding can cost more than the steel is worth, which means that scattered across America right now are freight cars that are, on paper, worth less than nothing. Their owners will sell one for whatever a person is holding, sometimes a few $100s, sometimes a handshake, just to get the liability off their books. People have quietly known this for a long time. During the Great Depression, retired boxcars with the wheels pulled off became homes on the edge of rail towns all over the country. And then the economy recovered, and America agreed to forget it ever happened. The man in this story did not know any of that history. 2 years ago, he had a one-bedroom apartment, a forklift job at a distribution warehouse, and a truck payment. Then the warehouse cut the overnight shift. Then the eviction notice went up on the door. Then the truck went back to the lender, and within about 90 days, he went from a man with a lease to a man carrying a duffel bag through a city that suddenly had no place for him. He tried the shelter system and lasted 11 nights, lying awake on a cot in a room with 60 strangers, listening to a man 3 beds over having the same nightmare every night, and realizing he felt less safe indoors than he had felt outside. That is the part of the shelter system that people who have never used it struggle to believe, and it is the reason so many people you see sleeping outside technically have a shelter bed available. Then one afternoon, walking the tracks because the tracks were quieter than the streets, he came to the dead siding and the row of rusted boxcars, and he climbed inside one to get out of the wind. Except this time, he did something different. He found out who owned it. 2 weeks of phone calls from a library computer led him to a scrap dealer 40 miles away, who had written the stranded cars off years earlier. The man offered everything he had, $400 in folded bills, for one boxcar and permission to stay on the siding. The dealer thought he was crazy. He also took the money. So here is what the title of this video promised. What is it actually like to live inside a steel train car? The people who have done it mention 3 things, and they mention them in the same order. The first is the sound. A boxcar roof is a single sheet of steel, and rain on that roof is not the gentle drumming people describe in tiny cabins. It is a roar. First-time visitors describe standing inside during a thunderstorm and being unable to hear a person shouting 3 feet away. And yet almost everyone who stays says the same unexpected thing. Within a few weeks, that roar becomes the deepest sleep they have had in years, because a storm loud enough to fill the whole world is also a storm that guarantees nobody is walking up on you. After years in doorways with one ear always open, a wall of sound becomes a kind of safety. The steel works the same way in reverse. 8 feet from a passing freight train, the inside of a closed boxcar is strangely calm, a low rumble in the floor and nothing more, because sound does not pass through steel plate the way it passes through a tent. The second thing is the temperature, and this is where the steel turns from a guardian into a threat. Wood insulates, concrete stores heat slowly. Steel does neither. A boxcar in July sun becomes an oven by 10 in the morning, hot enough inside to soften candles, and residents learn to be gone by 9 with both sliding doors cracked so the car can breathe. In January, the same steel pulls heat out of the air so fast that the inside can be colder than the outside, and a bare wall next to a sleeping bag will frostbite skin that touches it overnight. And then there is the phenomenon rail workers call boxcar rain. A sleeping body puts moisture into the air all night. That moisture condenses on the cold steel ceiling, and by dawn, it falls back down as icy drops onto the blankets below. Every long-term boxcar dweller fights the same three-stage war against the steel, a raised wooden floor on pallets, so their body never touches metal. Then foam board and moving blankets screwed against the walls, scavenged from renovation dumpsters one sheet at a time. And finally, a small wood stove in the corner, vented through a hole cut in the roof, which brings its own danger, because a stove inside a sealed steel box is a carbon monoxide trap, and the crack in the door that lets the poison out also lets the winter in. People have died in retired train cars exactly this way. The man in our story sleeps with a battery carbon monoxide alarm zip tied to the wall above his bed, and he calls it the most important $40 anyone ever gave him. The third thing is the door, and the door deserves its own moment. A boxcar's sliding door weighs several hundred pounds and runs on a steel track, and when it is shut and pinned from the inside, it does not open. Not for weather, not for a knife, not for a shoulder, not for anyone. People who have lived outside describe the first night behind that door in almost religious terms. He closed it, sat down on the plywood floor in the total darkness, and cried for an hour, not because anything was wrong, but because for the first time in 3 years, nothing could reach him. I want to pause right there, on that door, because I know from the comments that not everyone watching this is here out of curiosity. Some of you are one missed check away from a story like this one. Some of you have a brother, a daughter, or a neighbor sleeping in a car tonight. And a heartbreaking number of the people who end up outside in America are military veterans. On any given night, more than 30,000 American veterans sleep without a home. That is why we put together a guide called The Veteran's Blueprint. It walks through the emergency housing programs, the benefits most people never claim, and the lesser-known assistance strategies that can keep a struggling veteran, or honestly, anyone standing close to the edge, off the street entirely. These programs are scattered across a dozen different agencies, and most of the people who qualify for them never find them. So we gathered everything into one place. You will find the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. If you are struggling, it may change your next 6 months. And if you simply want to help someone who is, it will show you exactly where to start. Because what happened on the other side of that door is the part of this story nobody predicted, including him. Somewhere in the second month, he stopped sleeping in his boots. He had worn them to bed for 3 years, first on the street because stolen boots end lives in winter, then, out of a habit his body refused to break. The night he finally set them by the door was the night, he says, that he started thinking in weeks instead of hours. A brain that is not spending every minute on guard duty gets its planning back. 8 months after he pinned that door for the first time, he walked into a testing center and renewed his forklift certification, and he will tell anyone who asks that the paperwork was not the hard part. Sleeping was the hard part. 3 weeks later, a temp agency put him on a loading dock 4 nights a week, and the first thing he bought with the first check was not food and not clothes. It was a second carbon monoxide alarm, which he walked 2 cars down the siding and zip-tied above the bed of a neighbor you are about to meet. Ask him why, and he shrugs like the answer is obvious. Somebody gave him his. He was just keeping the thing moving. The certification needed one more thing, and it was the thing no one warns you about: an address. You cannot get hired, open a bank account, or receive a single official letter while living on a dead rail siding, because as far as the government is concerned, a place with no address does not exist, and neither do you. His took a sympathetic county clerk, 3 months of paperwork, and a rural route number attached to the scrap dealer's parcel. The first envelope that ever arrived with his name on it is still pinned to the wall above the stove, and he has never opened it, because the envelope was the point. Daily life inside the car runs on systems, because in 32 feet of living space, it has to. There is no plumbing, so water arrives in 5-gallon jugs, filled at a gas station a mile up the road, hauled 2 at a time in a garden wagon along the gravel service path. And in January, the jugs freeze solid unless they sit close to the stove. The bathroom is a bucket system and a shovel, handled with more discipline and more dignity than most people imagine, because in a space this small, sanitation is not a preference. It is survival. Food is canned goods and peanut butter stacked in a steel cabinet with the labels facing out. cooked on a camp stove by the open door with one eye always on the flame, because the raised wooden floor he sleeps on would burn like a pallet fire. Light is its own project. A boxcar with the doors shut is darker than any basement, a darkness so complete that new residents describe waking up unsure whether their eyes are open. So he runs a strip of solar path lights screwed above the bed and keeps a battery lantern hanging on a nail by the door where his hand can find it blind. And underneath all of it runs the quiet daily accounting of theft, because the siding is not fenced and word travels along the tracks. He keeps nothing of value visible from the door, keeps his documents in a fireproof pouch under a floorboard, and keeps the padlock oiled through the winter, because a padlock that freezes shut in the cold is a door you cannot get into either. And he is not alone out there anymore, which surprises people. Within a year of his arrival, 2 more of the stranded cars on that siding had tenants. An older Army veteran in a converted caboose 2 cars down, and a woman in her 60s who lost her apartment when her husband died and their retirement income was cut in half overnight. The 3 of them run the siding like a tiny, unofficial village. The veteran, who spent years as a mechanic, keeps everyone's stovepipes sealed and taught the others to read the color of a flame. The woman keeps a kettle going most afternoons and remembers everyone's appointments, because she spent 40 years remembering appointments for a dentist's office that never once imagined her sleeping in a Buick. And the man from our story hauls water for all 3 homes, 5-gallon jugs in a garden wagon, 2 at a time from a gas station a mile up the road, because he is the youngest by 20 years. Nobody organized this. Nobody funded it. It grew the way neighborhoods have always grown, out of proximity and cold weather, and the human refusal to watch someone struggle alone. If stories like this one are worth your time, hit subscribe. We cover one hidden American housing story like this every week. Now, look closer at that woman in her 60s, because she is not the exception on that siding. She is the trend. The fastest growing group of homeless Americans today is not troubled young men. It is people past 55, and social workers have a name for it: the gray wave. A machinist whose knees quit 3 years short of his pension. A widow doing the math on 1 Social Security check where there used to be 2. Tenants in their 70s handed a rent increase on an apartment they never once paid late on in 20 years. Most of them have never spent a night in jail, and many would rather sleep in a parked car than let their grandchildren find out, washing up in gas station sinks and keeping a clean shirt on a hanger in the back seat. For that generation, a crowded emergency shelter full of noise and strangers is often more frightening than the car. But a quiet steel room at the end of a dead rail line with a stove that holds a fire all night and neighbors their own age is an offer some of them will actually accept. The scale of the problem is not small. The 2024 federal count documented more than 770,000 Americans homeless on a single night, an 18% jump in 1 year and the highest number ever recorded. And after the Supreme Court's Grants Pass ruling made it legal for cities to fine and jail people simply for sleeping outside, a locked door stopped being just shelter. For a lot of people, it became the difference between a hard life and a criminal record. Now, it would be dishonest to end this story without sitting with the criticism, because the criticism is real and some of it is fair. In most cities, what this man did is trespassing, even with the dealer's blessing, because the land under a siding often belongs to someone else entirely. Fire marshals will tell you a wood stove in a steel box with 1 exit is a death trap. Railroad police, who pull people out of active yards every year, will tell you that living around trains kills, and they are right. And housing advocates make the deepest cut of all. They say a rusted freight car with a bucket toilet is not housing, that it is a tourniquet on a wound that needs surgery, and that every story like this one hands a city another excuse to never build the apartments it owes its people. All of that is true, but notice something about the argument. A tourniquet is what you use when help is hours away and the bleeding is now. Cities have spent decades and staggering sums per unit planning apartment buildings that the man freezing tonight will never live to see. Los Angeles has reportedly spent well over $100,000 per unit on some tiny home programs. Meanwhile, leaving one person outside can cost the public tens of thousands a year in ambulance runs, emergency rooms, police calls, and jail nights, and it shaves decades off that person's life through exposure, untreated illness, and violence. The man at the end of the siding spent $400 and a winter of scavenged foam board. His answer does not settle a 30-year housing debate. It just points out that while the debate ran, the boxcar took an afternoon and a handshake, and the people calling his home unacceptable are, almost without exception, going home tonight to a bed behind a locked door, which is exactly the thing they are explaining he should not have. So think back to that freight yard at 5 in the morning, 19 degrees, the switching tower dark. Rain is starting on the steel roof, loud as applause, and the man at the end of the dead siding sleeps straight through it. Boots by the door, coals holding in the stove, the alarm above his bed showing a steady green light. His house has rust stains running down walls that were riveted together before he was born, and no bank, no appraiser, and no zoning board would call it a home. But it does the only 3 jobs a home has ever really had. It keeps the cold on the outside, it keeps his name on an envelope, and it opens for exactly 1 person on Earth. And here is the detail worth carrying out of this story. Tarps shred in a season, pallet walls splinter in a year or two, and fiberglass fades in the sun. A freight car was built to carry 30 tons through 50 winters, and the thousands of retired cars sitting on dead sidings across America right now will still be sitting there, solid and shut, long after every council meeting about them has adjourned. People will keep arguing about whether homes like this should exist. The steel is not listening. If this story moved you, the link to the Veterans Blueprint stays in the description below for anyone who needs it, or anyone who knows someone who does. And if you want more true stories about the hidden ways ordinary people are solving impossible problems, hit subscribe, because next week we are meeting the grandmother who turned a $500 retired school bus into a home for herself and 2 grandchildren, and the small town that first tried to tow it away and then did something nobody saw coming. We will see you there.